What happens when a billionaire CEO, betrayed once before, decides that trust must be tested again? And what if the person he chooses to test is the one woman whose honesty could change his life forever? In the heart of Boston's glass towers. Lives. Graham Whitaker, a man with wealth, power, and scars hidden behind boardroom doors. Beside him, by chance and choice, stands Claire Sutton, an executive assistant from a modest background, carrying not only her planner and discipline, but the weight of her mother's failing health. Their story begins with suspicion, grows through storms both real and imagined, and forces one question: can love survive if it's built on a test, or can integrity rewrite the rules of power? One quiet act at a time. This is not just a story about wealth, it's about second chances, about learning that true strength comes not from control, but from trust. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. Millionaire CEO tested his secretary's loyalty and fell madly in love with her integrity. Boston's seaport shimmered at dusk, the waterfront alive with lights that bounced off the frozen harbor. The glass tower that bore Graham Whitaker's name caught the glow like a prism, each reflection brighter than the last. To passers-by, it was a monument to progress, the headquarters of a company that promised cleaner energy and a brighter future. To Graham himself, it was something different, an elegant fortress where success lived alongside silence. At 44, Graham had everything he had once told himself he wanted: a corner office that seemed to float above the city, a reputation for bold leadership and renewable energy, the kind of wealth that made the world open its doors. Yet, as night settled in, he felt the familiar echo of emptiness. It lived in the polished floor that clicked with every lonely footstep, in the hum of the HVAC system that replaced conversation, in the way his office glass reflected him back at himself, alone, untouchable, guarded. The habit of guarding had become second nature. Years ago, betrayal had come in the shape of a woman he once trusted with both his heart and his business. She had left him with a broken engagement, a fractured company, and a conviction that loyalty was fragile. Since then, Graham measured trust not by words but by tests. He would set the stage, plant temptations, and watch closely. It was not kindness that guided him, but fear. Fear that if he let down his guard, history would repeat itself. This evening, as the last rays turned the Charles River pink, Graham reviewed the file of his newest hire, Claire Sutton, 35 years old, born and raised in Western Massachusetts, educated at a state university, a solid track record in administrative leadership. Nothing flashy, nothing exaggerated. Her references spoke of precision, resilience, and a mind like clockwork. Yet what caught his eye was not her resume. It was the small note tucked at the end of her background check: primary caregiver for her mother, undergoing treatment for heart disease. To Graham, that line revealed more than any credential. It told him she had pressure, responsibility, and reasons she might bend. He had learned to see vulnerabilities not with sympathy, but with calculation. Would she guard her integrity under strain, or would she break if the reward was large enough? The next morning brought Claire's first day. She walked into the glass tower in a modest navy suit, carrying not a designer bag, but a worn leather tote. In her hands was a paper planner, pages marked with color-coded tabs and tiny notes. In a building run by digital calendars and automated systems, her planner seemed almost out of place. Yet, when she sat at her desk, the small book grounded her. Graham watched her through the glass of his office, not overtly, but with the practiced glance of someone who had learned to observe without seeming to. He noticed how she greeted the receptionist by name after hearing it only once, how she set her coffee not near her keyboard, but safely on a coaster, as though respect extended even to furniture, how she paused before answering a question, choosing clarity over speed, small details, yet they spoke of something steady beneath the surface. His own desk, by contrast, gleamed with minimalism. No photos, no plants, no personal items, only a laptop, a fountain pen, and a single-frame certificate from MIT. The walls of his office rose in glass and steel, designed to signal transparency, but in truth, creating distance. Graham lived inside a symbol of openness while practicing caution at every turn. The contrast between him and Claire struck sharper as the day unfolded. When a meeting request came in, she didn't just schedule it. She checked travel times, weather forecasts, and even noted the dietary restrictions of attendees. She anticipated, she prevented mistakes before they could occur. She carried herself not with ambition on her sleeve, but with quiet competence. Still, Graham knew better than to take first impressions as truth. Everyone wore their best face at the start. The real measure came when pressure rose, when choices cut close to bone. That was when character revealed itself. And Graham was not about to entrust his company, or his guarded heart, to anyone untested. As evening fell, the office emptied. Claire lingered, finishing her notes by lamplight. Graham passed by, his steps silent on the carpet. He glanced at her planner lying open. Each task was checked off, each page neat but not obsessive. In the corner, written small, was a line mom's appointment, Tuesday 9 a.m. A reminder not hidden, not coded, simply placed among work duties as though both belonged to the same life. That detail stayed with him. Many in his circle of executives would have kept personal matters invisible, protecting appearances. Claire made no effort to disguise her reality. She was here to work, but she was also a daughter carrying weight beyond these walls. Back in his office, Graham closed the blinds. He stood at the window a long time, looking at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. Trust. The word itself felt dangerous. He knew his board expected efficiency. Investors expected results. They did not care if he trusted his secretary. But Graham cared, because history had carved caution into him. He could not risk proximity without proof. And so, as the clock struck 9 and the tower settled into silence, Graham decided Claire Sutton would be tested, not in ways she could anticipate, but in subtle trials woven into her days. He would see if her loyalty was genuine or merely convenience. He would watch if her integrity bent under weight or held firm. He told himself it was business. In truth, it was personal. Outside, snow began to drift against the harbor, flakes catching the streetlight glow. Graham gathered his coat and glanced once more at the planner on Claire's desk as he passed. She was writing her final note for the day, pen moving with calm certainty. He didn't stop. He didn't speak. But as he entered the elevator, he whispered to the empty air, words that were more a challenge to himself than to her. Earn it. The doors closed, and with them began a test that would measure not only Claire's loyalty, but his own capacity to believe again. Sometimes the smallest habits tell the biggest truths. A week at a desk can reveal a lifetime of character. For Graham Whitaker, that first week of Claire Sutton's presence became a quiet study in detail. Monday began with a schedule crisis. A key investor had flown in a day early, demanding a meeting that wasn't on the calendar. Graham expected the usual scramble calls, delays, apologies. Instead, Claire stepped into his doorway with a printed agenda already in hand. She had shifted 2 less urgent meetings, booked a quiet conference room, and arranged a car to collect the investor from the hotel. 10 minutes buffer, she said simply, sliding the agenda onto his desk. So, you're not rushed between calls. The investor left the building later that afternoon, praising Graham's efficiency. Graham knew better. The efficiency had been hers. He had seen assistants cover emergencies before, but rarely with such calm foresight. Most people reacted. Claire anticipated. By midweek, a new pattern emerged. At the close of each day, Graham received a crisp recap. Email meetings held, decisions made, tasks assigned. Each note carried a timestamp, a digital signature, and links to supporting documents. No vague language. No missing pieces. Everything accounted for. It struck him how naturally she documented, as though transparency wasn't effort but instinct. He thought of his own past, of secrets hidden until too late, of betrayal that had thrived in shadows. In Claire's system, there was no room for shadows. Small details revealed her values more than her reports. On Tuesday morning, she left a small basket in the break room, homemade blueberry muffins, still warm. A folded card read, "Contains nuts. Please avoid if allergic." Graham overheard the receptionist marveling. Nobody ever labels these things. She even thought of that. Graham noted it quietly. The muffins weren't grand, but they carried thoughtfulness, the kind that considered others' needs before they asked. In his world of power lunches and catered spreads, that simple gesture seemed more radical than any gourmet dish. He also noticed what she refused. A courier delivered a glossy holiday basket from a vendor known for pressing favors. Claire accepted it politely, logged it in the gift register, and arranged to donate it to a local shelter. She informed the vendor's rep with a calm tone. "Company policy. We appreciate the gesture, but we keep our work independent." The rep looked disappointed. Claire did not flinch. Graham watched from his office doorway, unseen, and felt something he hadn't in years: relief. Someone else was drawing lines in the sand without needing his direction. By Friday, Claire's presence had begun to change the office atmosphere. Staff who once kept their heads down now lingered at her desk with questions. She answered patiently, never rushed, never condescending. Her planner lay open each time, a map of neat handwriting and color-coded notes. She jotted updates with a fountain pen, the kind of old-fashioned tool few used anymore. Graham found himself wondering about the woman behind the planner. What life shaped her habits? What choices taught her to guard integrity so fiercely? He caught glimpses of a phone call in the hall where her voice softened. "Yes, Mom, Tuesday morning, I'll be there." Or the way she checked the clock precisely at 5, not to leave early, but to confirm medication reminders she had set. And yet, for all the openness of her habits, Graham's old instincts whispered caution. Anyone could look perfect in week 1. True loyalty revealed itself when tested. Late Friday afternoon, as the office thinned and the sky turned amber over the harbor, a courier delivered another envelope. This one bore no company logo, just Claire's name in block letters. She opened it at her desk, brow furrowing. Inside lay a polished card, $500 at a luxury department store, and a slip of paper with a typed message. "For your hard work this week. A little appreciation. Hope to continue our partnership with your office." The sender was a vendor Graham knew well, one who had fought for contracts aggressively in the past. The card was not a gift. It was a test in disguise, the kind of bait that blurred lines between gratitude and influence. Claire held the envelope lightly, her thumb pressing the edge. To anyone passing by, it looked like nothing more than an after-hours errand. But Graham, watching from his office doorway again, saw the weight of the moment. He knew what she faced: the temptation to rationalize, to accept a reward that no one might notice, to use it for needs no one would question. For Claire, it wasn't the card itself. It was what the card implied about who she was, and who she might become if she said yes. She exhaled, the air visible in the dim evening light, and looked down at the envelope once more. Integrity is quiet. It doesn't announce itself with banners or speeches. It files a report, returns a gift, and keeps moving. The following Monday, Claire Sutton walked into the compliance office carrying the cream-colored envelope. She placed it gently on the desk of the company's legal officer, along with a brief memo. The note described when the envelope had been delivered, what it contained, and who the sender was. No emotion, no speculation, just facts, logged and signed. By mid-afternoon, the vendor had been contacted, the card declined, and the incident recorded in the company's official register. Claire didn't mention it to anyone else. She didn't bring it up in conversation with colleagues. She didn't stop by Graham's office seeking approval or thanks. She did her part, then turned back to her planner and her stack of meeting notes. For Graham Whitaker, that silence was more powerful than any declaration. He had seen plenty of people handle compliance issues, but most looked for recognition afterward. They wanted to be praised for honesty, to use integrity as a currency of its own. Claire didn't trade in that. She moved on as though refusing the gift was as ordinary as checking email. It made Graham stop and think. Perhaps for her, it was. He noticed her more in the small spaces of the day. In the elevator one morning, she held the door for a young intern racing in, even though she herself was running late to a call. She smiled, adjusted her planner under her arm, and pressed the button without complaint. In the break room, she rinsed her coffee mug carefully before setting it on the rack. No assistant left to clean up after her. When someone spilled sugar across the counter, she brushed it into a napkin and threw it away. Little actions, almost invisible, but they drew lines. Claire seemed to believe that responsibility wasn't only about the big decisions. It lived in the small ones, too. Her planner reflected the same philosophy. Graham glimpsed it one afternoon when she had it open at her desk. Bright stickers marked deadlines. Notes were underlined in different colors, and across the margins were quiet reminders. Call mom, check medication, send flowers to hospital nurse. She kept her personal duties side by side with corporate ones, refusing to pretend they were separate worlds. Graham found himself watching these things with a mix of admiration and unease. Admiration because she acted with a steadiness he rarely saw. Unease because he wondered if it could possibly last. People were consistent until temptation pressed hard enough. Then habits cracked. That thought pushed him toward the decision he had been circling since her first week. Tests revealed truth. He had relied on them before, and he would again. This time, the test would not be a gift card or a simple slip. It would be something larger, something harder to decline. Late Wednesday night, after the office lights had gone dark, Graham met with his head of security. "Draft the email," he instructed. His voice was calm, but inside, a familiar tension coiled. He justified it as protection for the company, for himself. Yet he knew it was more than that. It was his old wound, steering him again. By Thursday morning, the email waited in Claire's inbox. It bore the name of a competitor, polished and professional. The offer was enticing, an executive assistant position with double her current salary, stock options, and the promise of autonomy to build her own department. The message praised her diligence, hinted at having observed her talent, and invited her to discuss opportunities in confidence. Claire read it at her desk, brow knitting slightly. She scrolled down, eyes narrowing at the generous package. For a moment, her reflection caught in the screen, framed by the glow of opportunity. Anyone else might have paused with excitement, heart racing at the prospect. Instead, Claire reached for her pen. She opened her planner, turned to a fresh page, and began drafting notes. Not a reply to the offer, but a record of receipt date, time, sender. Her pen moved steadily, her lips pressed together in thought. She leaned back, exhaled, and stared at the email again. Then she clicked forward. The subject line she typed was simple: potential conflict of interest, unsolicited job offer. Her cursor hovered a moment before she hit send. Not to the competitor, but to the compliance department. In Graham's office, unseen behind his glass wall. He watched her shoulders relax slightly once the message was gone. She returned to her planner, ticking off the next meeting task as though nothing unusual had happened. The test had been set, the line had been drawn, and Claire had chosen to stand on the side that mattered. A glittering door swings open. The truest test is not choosing which path to take, but which doors to leave closed. The email from the competitor stayed in Claire Sutton's inbox for less than 15 minutes. She did not dwell on it, did not reread the generous promises, did not let herself imagine what it might feel like to walk into a corner office in another city with double her salary and the promise of autonomy. Instead, she forwarded it to the Human Resources Department, copying compliance, with a short note: unsolicited offer, potential conflict of interest, documented as received. There was no drama in her action, no inner speech of sacrifice. To Claire, it was simple. Her role demanded integrity, and integrity demanded record-keeping. She added the incident to her planner, noting the date, the sender, and the time she had forwarded it. Then she closed the email, turned to her task list, and carried on. By early afternoon, a formal acknowledgement came back from compliance, thanking her for reporting. HR flagged the email for further review. Claire filed the responses in her neatly organized system and checked the matter off her list. In his office, Graham Whitaker received the report too. He read the forwarded email, then her brief summary. There was no flourish, no attempt to show her worth. She hadn't even CC'd him directly. His copy came through standard compliance routing. For the second time in 2 weeks, she had taken a test he had set and treated it like routine housekeeping. No performance, no bargaining chip, just work. Graham leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes drawn to the harbor beyond the window. Something in his chest eased, though he would not admit it aloud. Integrity, when it was real, didn't need witnesses. Meanwhile, Claire returned to the small rhythm of office life. She called a repair service for the espresso machine that had been sputtering for days, explaining carefully to the receptionist what the issue was so the technician would bring the right part. She checked in with catering for the board's extended meeting, balancing vegetarian requests with the need for protein-heavy options. She arranged sandwich trays for staff working late, making sure nobody was left hungry through the evening. There was nothing grand in these tasks, yet they built an environment where people felt considered, where order replaced chaos. Claire moved through it all with a calm presence, pen scratching across her planner as she ticked each duty completed. Her phone buzzed once with a personal reminder, her mother's cardiology appointment in 2 days. She silenced the alert, underlined it on her planner, and kept going. She never blended the two worlds in conversation, but the planner told the truth. Her life was lived in layers, each one demanding care. Not once did she knock on Graham's door to ask if he had seen her report. Not once did she seek acknowledgement for handling the situation. She trusted that the system itself, the documentation, was enough. For her, the work spoke. Late that afternoon, Graham passed her desk. Claire looked up, offered a polite nod, and returned to her notes. On the edge of her desk sat a tray of neatly stacked agendas for the following day. Each one labeled. She did not pause, did not try to draw him into conversation. Professional boundaries stayed firm, and Graham found himself strangely grateful. He had built walls around his life, high and cold. Yet here was someone who respected those boundaries without needing to be told, who worked inside them without pressing closer. The sun dipped lower. The harbor shifted to silver under a sky heavy with gray. Weather alerts began to pop up across phones and computer screens. A nor'easter was moving up the coast, faster than forecasts had predicted. Flights were being canceled, bridges prepared for closure. By the time twilight fell, the storm had thickened. Wind pressed hard against the glass tower, howling through the seams. Snow swirled so dense it erased the city beyond. Inside, emergency alerts buzzed through the building, warning employees not to attempt the drive home until roads were cleared. Dozens of staff lingered uncertainly in the halls, coats in hand, phones pressed to their ears. The harbor ferry suspended service. Taxi lines evaporated, one by one. Employees realized they were stuck. The building management rolled out cots and blankets, setting up makeshift rest areas and conference rooms. Claire walked calmly through the confusion, directing people towards safe areas, checking in with catering for extra food supplies. She pulled her sweater tighter against the draft and guided interns toward the large meeting hall where heaters hummed. Her voice was steady, her tone practical. She logged each decision in her planner, even now. From his corner office, Graham stood watching the snow erase the skyline. The storm had turned the tower into an island. The world beyond was gone, replaced by white, and inside, another kind of weather was gathering, quiet, human, and entirely unplanned. When the lights fail, character takes the shift. The storm tightened its grip on Boston overnight. Snow slammed against the glass tower, thick enough to erase the horizon. By 9, the building groaned under the pressure of wind. Just after midnight, the lights flickered. Then, with a low hum, the power dropped. For a moment, silence filled the halls. The steady whir of HVAC stopped. Screens went black. Only the glow of emergency lights remained, dim and uncertain. The office, once sleek and polished, felt suddenly fragile. Claire Sutton did not panic. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and headed toward the supply closet. Within minutes, she emerged with a stack of thin blankets, still sealed in plastic. She handed them out one by one, wrapping them around interns shivering in the conference hall. In the small kitchen, she located cans of soup left from emergency storage. She opened them with a manual opener, poured the contents into metal pots, and set them to warm over portable burners kept for situations like this. The smell of chicken broth soon softened the air, giving comfort where heat could not. She moved quietly from group to group, kneeling to meet eye level, asking simple questions. Are you warm enough? Do you need water? Do you want to call someone before the cell towers fill? Her voice steadied the atmosphere, keeping panic from rising. Graham Whitaker stood in the doorway of his darkened office, watching. His people looked to her, not him, in those hours. And she gave without fanfare, not commanding but guiding. Her care was not sentimental. It was organized, efficient, the kind that saved both comfort and dignity. Around 2 a.m, Graham wandered into the break room. Claire was ladling soup into paper cups, her hair pulled back, her face pale but focused. She offered him one without pause. You should eat, she said softly. He accepted, feeling the warmth seep through the thin cup into his palms. They sat across from each other at the small table, the dim red glow of exit signs their only light. For a while, they said little. Words felt heavy in the hush of the storm. Instead, small gestures carried meaning. She pulled her blanket tighter and asked quietly if he had family nearby. He hesitated, then admitted, no one left in Boston. He did not mention the broken engagement, the trust fractured years before. She nodded once, eyes steady but kind. My mother's in Springfield. I check in twice a day. She didn't elaborate, didn't explain the hospital bills or the nights she stayed awake balancing ledgers of time and money, but her presence carried it all. They sat like that, 2 people sharing warmth not just from soup but from honesty, stripped of the glass walls and titles that usually separated them. By dawn, the storm loosened. Snow still covered the city, but the fiercest winds had passed. A low cheer rose as the emergency lights brightened slightly, powered by backup generators. People stretched, called loved ones, prepared for the dig-out to begin. Relief moved through the building like a slow exhale. Staff packed their things, waiting for word that roads would reopen. Claire slipped back to her desk, planner open, pen steady. She logged the night's events in tidy lines, power loss, supply distribution, staff accounted for. It was not for credit. It was because records mattered. At 8, her phone buzzed with a new notification, a direct deposit alert. She frowned. Payroll wasn't due for another week. Opening her banking app, she froze. $75,000. Marked as refund vendor. Her chest tightened. She scrolled again, certain it was a mistake. The numbers stayed. The sender line carried a familiar name, one of the company's major contractors. Money that was never hers. Sitting suddenly in her account. For a moment, her hands trembled. The sum was larger than a year's salary, enough to cover her mother's surgeries, medication, debts, enough to ease every sleepless night she'd carried alone. Temptation flickered, but only for a breath. Claire closed her eyes, inhaled once, then tapped through the banking menu. Her finger hovered over the screen. Not transfer, not withdraw. She selected freeze account. The system asked for confirmation. She pressed yes. Her account locked. The funds untouchable. She sat back in her chair, heart pounding. She whispered into the still air, steady and firm, as if reminding herself, not mine. Fear pricked at her. What if it had been deliberate? What if someone accused her of collusion, but she did not let the fear thaw her resolve? She documented the transaction, printed the notice, and began drafting her disclosure. Outside, snow still buried the streets. Inside, another kind of storm had broken, and Claire had met it with the same quiet steadiness she carried through every other test. Need knocks. Integrity answers sometimes with trembling hands. Claire Sutton sat at her desk with the glow of her laptop washing over her pale face. The $75,000 still showed in her banking app, frozen but undeniable. She had done the right thing the night before, locking it down before even 1 cent could move, yet the figure pressed against her mind, heavy as stone. Her phone buzzed again with a hospital reminder. Her mother's procedure had been advanced. The cardiologist wanted to schedule intervention within the month. Costs loomed tens of thousands even after insurance. Claire closed her eyes, steadying her breath. The temptation to keep the money was no longer abstract. It was personal, sharp, urgent. Still, she picked up the phone and called the bank. Freeze confirmed, the representative told her. We'll log it as potential fraud until your employer provides instructions. Claire thanked her, voice even, though her hand shook as she hung up. Next came the company. She typed a formal memo, attaching screenshots of the transaction, timestamps, and her own account log. She sent it simultaneously to the CFO, compliance, and legal. Then she printed hard copies, slid them into a folder, and carried it down the hushed hallway herself. At compliance, she placed the folder on the officer's desk. This isn't mine, she said simply. Her tone was calm, but her knuckles whitened around the planner she held in her other hand. The investigation began immediately. By mid-afternoon, whispers ran through the upper floors. Someone had tried to funnel money into the new executive assistant's account. Was it a bribe, a refund, a clerical error, legal theories piled up? The likeliest explanation pointed to a vendor attempting to secure priority access to Graham Whitaker himself. Using Claire as the channel, Graham received the report with a chill running down his spine. He had known about the test. He had approved it. Legal had staged the transfer with all the proper safeguards, believing it was a controlled scenario to measure integrity. But now, reading Claire's memo, formal, unflinching, precise, he felt none of the relief he had expected. Instead, shame pressed close. He saw the cost she carried, the pressure of her mother's failing heart, the weight of bills no assistant's salary could ease. He imagined her sitting at her small kitchen table, calculator in hand, choosing between medication and rent. And he had thrown $75,000 in her path as bait. The trap was his, not hers. Claire, meanwhile, moved forward with the same steady rhythm she carried through every challenge. She coordinated postponed meetings, rescheduled flights canceled by the storm, and ordered new supplies for the break room. When staff asked if she was all right after the long night, she nodded, smiled faintly, and kept working. But when the compliance officer returned later that day with forms requiring her signature, she paused. The documents declared formally that she had received the funds, had not touched them, and requested the company trace the source fully. Her hand hovered over the pen. She thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed, monitors blinking, nurses adjusting lines. She thought of the bill waiting in her mailbox, the one she hadn't dared to open yet. Her chest tightened. The pen trembled. Then she lowered it to the page. She signed, one page, then the next, line after line. She affirmed that the money was not hers, that she wanted it investigated, that she would rather struggle openly than survive on shadows. She handed the forms back with steady fingers. "Please confirm receipt," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not break. The officer nodded, impressed, almost moved. "We'll trace every cent." Graham read the signed documents later that evening in his office. He stared at her signature, neat, clear, unwavering. Each line felt like a mirror held to his own face. He had thought the test was about her. In truth, it was about him. He had doubted her without cause, projected his old wounds onto someone who deserved trust from the start. The sting of that realization settled deep. Through the glass, he watched Claire leave for the night, tote bag over her shoulder, planner tucked against her chest. She moved like someone carrying both burden and strength, refusing to let either define her alone. And for the first time in years, Graham wondered if the next test had nothing to do with her integrity. Maybe the next test would be his, whether he could stop building traps and start building trust. Rumors move faster than truth, especially in a quiet office with bright glass walls. Within days of the frozen account incident, whispers began to slide through the halls of Whitaker Renewable. They started small, an overheard sentence at the coffee machine, a comment in the elevator. Did you hear the new assistant got money wired into her account by lunchtime? The details shifted. She took it, but returned it once she was caught. By the next morning, she's playing the long game. She knows how to catch the CEO's eye. The walls of glass reflected ambition and innovation to the outside world. Inside, they amplified gossip, bouncing it from one workstation to another until the air itself felt charged. Claire Sutton walked through it quietly, planner under her arm, gaze steady. She heard the half-finished sentences cut off when she entered a room. She saw glances exchanged, lips pressed tight as though holding back laughter or suspicion. She did not confront the talk directly. Instead, she gathered records. She compiled a packet of documentation, the bank notification, her freeze request, the compliance report, her signed declarations. Every email, every timestamp, every memo was included. It was not a defense made of words. It was proof made of paper. She handed copies to legal, to compliance, and finally, to Graham Whitaker himself. Full transparency, she said. Her voice did not tremble. Outside the building, the storm grew louder. On an anonymous message board used by finance insiders, a post appeared claiming unethical payments tied to Whitaker Renewable Executive Office. It twisted fact into innuendo, suggesting favoritism, hidden deals, even romantic entanglements. Short sellers seized the narrative. A research note circulated online, hinting that corporate governance concerns could affect valuation. Shares dipped 2 points in a day. Graham read every word with a clenched jaw. He knew where the trail began with him. With the test he had authorized, believing it would prove something private. Instead, it had fed an atmosphere of suspicion, giving oxygen to lies. He sat in his office that night, city lights flickering beyond the window, and felt the sting of his own making. Claire, meanwhile, kept working. She scheduled investor calls, balanced agendas, and checked on catering for a sustainability conference. Yet beneath the calm, fatigue edged her eyes. The pressure outside pressed close. At the hospital, her mother asked softly, "Are people treating you kindly at work?" Claire only smiled, kissed her forehead, and changed the subject. On Thursday morning, another email slid into her inbox. This one was not polished. It came from an unmarked account, plain text, no signature. Provide Mr. Whitaker's travel schedule. If you don't, your mother's treatment will be delayed. We know where her surgery is booked. Claire stared at the words, the cursor blinking at the end of the threat. Her pulse thudded in her ears. For a long moment, the world narrowed to the glow of the screen and the sound of her own breath. She thought of her mother's fragile heart, the long nights pacing hospital corridors, the weight of bills stacked at home. She thought of how easy it would be to forward a calendar invite, to type a list of flights and hotels, a few keystrokes, and fear might loosen its grip. Her hand hovered over the keyboard, then she pulled it back. Slowly, deliberately, she pressed print. The machine hummed, spitting out the single page. She lifted it, slid it into a folder, and closed the flap. Her breath steadied. She would not let fear drive this car. When your heart is on the line, the right thing gets harder, never smaller. Claire Sutton walked into the Boston field office of the FBI with the folder under her arm. Inside were the pages she had printed the threatening email, her memos, her compliance reports. She handed them across the desk to an agent whose face remained unreadable as he scanned the words. "This is not just workplace gossip," Claire said quietly. "They knew my mother's procedure schedule. They tried to use her health against me." The agent nodded. "We've seen overlaps between corporate sabotage and medical interference before. Let's see where this leads." By afternoon, Claire also stood before the company's general counsel, outlining the same facts. She drew a careful connection: the anonymous threats, the timing of the short seller's report, the sudden dip in stock value. The strands wove together into a pattern: her mother's hospital appointments, the fake refund deposit, the rumor mill, all pressing toward one purpose: weaken Graham Whitaker's company for profit. At the hospital, administrators confirmed what chilled her most. Someone had attempted to alter her mother's appointment time, pushing it weeks later under the guise of availability issues. Claire's throat tightened when she heard it. Without the surgery soon, her mother's odds shrank. Legal teams traced the interference. A chain of digital breadcrumbs pointed toward a hedge fund holding large short positions in Whitaker Renewable. The same fund had ties to the vendor who'd accidentally wired the $75,000. Meanwhile, Graham faced his own reckoning. In a conference room with legal, he admitted what he had concealed: the stage transfer, approved under his watch as a test. His words were clipped, stripped of defense. It was my authorization. Full accountability lies with me. He expected anger, perhaps resignation demands. Instead, the room stayed coldly procedural. The board will review, counsel replied. For now, you've created exposure we must manage. When Graham left, his reflection in the glass door looked unfamiliar. For the first time, he saw the cost of his mistrust not in balance sheets, but in Claire's steady handwriting on compliance forms. That evening, the FBI called Claire back. They had connected dots she feared but already sensed: the threats, the rumors, the financial pressure they formed part of an orchestrated scheme, and they wanted her help to end it. If you continue to cooperate, the agent said, we can set a trap. Reply to the threats. Appear to comply. It will draw them closer. Claire's breath caught. To act as bait meant risk. Risk not only to her, but to her mother, whose health was fragile enough without added delays. Every instinct as a daughter screamed to focus on the surgery, to protect her mother above all else. But another instinct pressed too, the one that told her integrity was not just personal. It was a chain. If she broke it, others would pay later. If she stood, perhaps the chain would hold for more than herself. That night, in her small apartment, she sat at the kitchen table with her planner open. Bills spread across the surface like a map of pressure points: hospital fees, prescriptions, utilities. Her pen hovered, her heart heavy. She pictured her mother's smile, tired but warm. She pictured Graham's face, strained with shame when he read her reports. She pictured the interns at work, the staff who had trusted her with soup and blankets during the storm. The choice was no longer about herself. Slowly, she wrote across the page, agree to cooperate with FBI plan. Document everything. Protect Mom by truth, not shortcuts. Her hand shook as she underlined the words. Then she picked up the phone and called her mother. Her voice softened, steady as she could make it. They may try to make things harder, but we'll face it together. You focus on healing. Let me handle the rest. Her mother's reply was faint but certain. Claire, do what's right. Don't let fear choose for you. Claire hung up, wiped her eyes, and closed her planner. Love didn't ask her to shrink. It asked her to be brave. Some nights, Justice wears a tuxedo and waits by the stage lights. The Boston Symphony Hall glittered with chandeliers that cast warm gold over gowns and black suits. The annual gala brought together the city's elite bankers, politicians, innovators. Tonight, it also carried a secret purpose. Claire Sutton stepped through the hall's side entrance, her gown understated but elegant, her planner tucked into a clutch. Inside, it was the keystone of the plan. A travel schedule that looked authentic, yet bore a faint digital watermark, invisible to the naked eye. The watermark would track anyone who tried to use it. She had typed the schedule herself, hands steady even as her pulse raced. Flights, hotels, meeting notes all fabricated. At the bottom, she had added one line that would bait the trap: a supposed dinner with a senior Department of Energy official, right here in Boston. The email carrying that file had already been sent to the anonymous account. Now she waited, unseen in the crowd. FBI agents moved like shadows, earpieces glinting beneath soft lights. Whitaker Renewable's own security blended with catering staff and ushers, eyes scanning for the contact who would approach. At the far end of the hall, Graham Whitaker mingled stiffly with board members. His tuxedo was sharp, his smile practiced, but beneath the surface, regret gnawed. He had stood before HR and the board that afternoon, admitting his mistake in sanctioning personal tests of loyalty. "I believed I was protecting us," he had said, "but I created risk we didn't need. I take full responsibility." Some directors nodded, others frowned. The verdict was deferred. Still, he had spoken truth for the first time in years. Tonight, he would see what it cost. Claire moved among the crowd, offering polite greetings. Accepting a glass of water she barely sipped. Her eyes tracked the middle manager from finance, a man often overlooked. Always agreeable, never too loud. He drifted closer to her, his posture too careful. When he asked about her evening, his voice was casual, too casual. His hand brushed hers as he took the folded schedule from her clutch. The paper passed like nothing, but the moment he touched it, the watermark embedded its signal. Across the street, in a van filled with screens, a red dot lit up. The chain had begun. Minutes later, the man slipped into a side corridor, phone out. He snapped a photo of the schedule, attached it to a message, and hit send. The recipient, a polished woman representing the hedge fund, received it on her device, unaware of the trap closing around her. The FBI moved. Agents stepped from behind curtains, blocking the exits. Security followed, firm but quiet, guiding guests away from the commotion. Within moments, both the insider and the hedge fund contact were cornered, phones confiscated, the marked schedule pulled from their hands. Graham saw it unfold from across the hall. Relief surged, mixed with a sharp sting of shame. Claire had been forced to stand in the storm his choices had stirred, and yet she had faced it with more courage than he had ever managed. At the hospital that same night, Claire's mother lay prepped for surgery. An independent medical team, arranged by federal authorities, stood guard to ensure no delay. The clock ticked forward, and the operation began on time. For Claire, that was the only victory that truly mattered. By midnight, news broke. The FBI released a statement confirming arrests tied to corporate sabotage and stock manipulation. Outlets that had once whispered innuendo now reported facts. The tide turned, and public sympathy began to swing back toward Whitaker Renewable. Inside the company, the board convened again. This time, they looked not only at Graham, but at Claire. She was no longer just an assistant. She was the woman who had carried integrity through threat and temptation, who had helped dismantle a scheme designed to topple them. But the conclusion was sharp. She cannot remain in her current role, one director said. Her position as secretary is compromised. Too much visibility, too much liability. Graham felt the weight of the words. Claire would no longer sit outside his office, planner open, quietly keeping the rhythm of his days. Whether she stayed at the company in another role or left altogether was no longer his choice to make. As the gala emptied and the symphony hall returned to silence, Graham found himself standing by the stage lights, watching Claire slip her planner back into her clutch. She looked tired, but her eyes held a quiet triumph. The trap had closed, the truth had won. And yet, the hardest question lingered, waiting in the wings what came after. The loudest question sometimes whispers, do you leave to be free or stay to be whole? 2 weeks after the gala, Claire Sutton sat at her small kitchen table with a letterhead from San Francisco lying open before her. A West Coast technology conglomerate was offering her the title of Operations Director, salary doubled, equity shares generous enough to secure her mother's long-term care, autonomy promised in every line of the contract. The offer glittered, but glitter was not the same as peace. At Whitaker Renewable, the board had moved quickly. Graham Whitaker stepped away from all decisions involving Claire. He sent a written statement to HR and directors effective immediately. I recuse myself from matters regarding Ms. Sutton's compensation or advancement. It was a boundary he should have drawn long before, but now he honored it. For Claire, it was not only an act of respect, it was a quiet apology. Still, the office air had not fully cleared. Gossip thinned but did not vanish. A few colleagues spoke warmly, others with hesitation. To stay meant living under a microscope. Every decision tested not by systems, but by whispers. To leave meant freedom from suspicion, but also leaving behind the culture she had fought to shape. She carried the dilemma in silence, jotting notes in her planner like a ledger of choices. One page read, leave, independence, higher pay, fresh start. Another, stay, credibility, unfinished work, proof that trust can grow here. At the hospital, her mother recovered slowly from surgery, tubes gone, color returning. She squeezed Claire's hand with surprising strength. One evening, as the sun set through the blinds, Claire told her about the offer. "They want me in California," she said softly. "Big title, big money." Her mother studied her for a long time. "But what do you want?" "Claire, not what pays the bills, not what silences the noise. What gives you peace?" Claire looked down at her hands, remembering the long nights of soup and blankets during the blackout, the steady signatures on compliance forms, the sting of rumors, the strength of standing firm. "I want to build something honest," she whispered. "Not just for me, for the people who come after?" Her mother nodded. "Then money is not the answer. Integrity is." The words settled deep. Back at the office, Claire prepared her response. She drafted a proposal, not a resignation. Her conditions were clear: a formal policy requiring disclosure of personal relationships, a dual reporting line to both Graham and the board, and a protected channel for whistleblowers. She typed them calmly, each sentence precise. It was not bargaining for her position. It was laying bricks for a culture she believed in. The board reviewed her terms. Debate circled, some worried about precedent, others about control. Graham remained silent, hands folded, gaze steady on the table. Finally, the chairwoman spoke. "If she stays under these conditions, we strengthen not weaken our governance." The motion carried. That evening, Claire sat again at her kitchen table. The San Francisco contract still lay there, its deadline near. She picked up her pen, hesitated only a moment, then wrote one word across the bottom. "Decline." She folded the paper, slid it into the return envelope, and set it aside. The offer expired. Her resolve did not. She called her mother, her voice calm, carrying both weight and lightness. "I'm staying, not because it's easier, because it's right." Her mother's laugh, soft and tired but real, answered back, "That's my girl." Next came the hard work not of leaving, but of healing. Healing doesn't erase scars. It teaches you how to live with them and love through them. Spring came late to Boston, the kind where sunlight lingers, but the wind still carries salt from the harbor. In the tall glass tower, change had taken root. Claire Sutton no longer sat outside Graham Whitaker's office, fielding his calls and guarding his calendar. After weeks of careful transition, she had accepted a new role, chief of staff, reporting directly to the COO. It placed her outside Graham's direct line, a buffer of governance that preserved professionalism while honoring her contributions. The adjustment was not without tension. Some whispered she had been promoted out of sight. Others said it was a clever move to keep her influence without scandal. Claire ignored the noise. What mattered was the substance. Her first project was the trust code. She rolled out clear policies, strict anti-gift limits, anonymous whistleblower channels, and mandatory ethics training. The code was not lofty words, it was practical steps. Employees received cards for wallets, quick references for what to do if faced with a bribe or conflict. Managers attended workshops, some grumbling at first, but gradually admitting the sessions made them rethink habits. The office shifted, small but noticeable. Conversations grew clearer, reports carried more detail. The weight of secrecy began to lift. Graham himself stood before employees in the atrium one morning. No podium, just a microphone and his hands folded loosely. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice steady. For years, I believed trust had to be tested, not earned. That mistake put this company, and people I value, at risk. I will not lead that way again. From now on, I will build by empowering, not controlling. The silence that followed was thick, not hostile, but heavy. Then came applause, slow, uneven, yet real. Graham exhaled, as though shedding a weight that had lived on his shoulders too long. Outside the city, life carried a different rhythm. Claire spent weekends in Cape Cod, where her mother continued to heal. The small cottage they rented smelled of salt and lilacs. Claire brewed tea, folded laundry, and read aloud from magazines while her mother dozed in the sun. On those quiet afternoons, Graham sometimes joined, arriving without fanfare. He brought groceries, or books her mother had once mentioned. He never stayed long, never imposed. Instead, he offered presence like a steady shoreline solid, dependable, respectful of space. What Claire did not know was that he had begun funding a cardiac research grant through an anonymous foundation called Harbor Light. He wanted her mother's strength restored, not as repayment, but as gratitude. Gratitude for the daughter who had taught him trust could be rebuilt. In the boardroom, he kept his promise. He delegated, invited input, let silence stretch until others filled it with ideas. It was not easy. Old habits tugged, the urge to test or control rising like tides. But each time, he reminded himself scars were not excuses. They were lessons. One evening, after a long day, Graham opened a drawer in his Beacon Hill home. Inside lay a small box. He lifted it, thumb tracing the edge. The ring inside was simple, but strong, a band of white gold, set with a modest diamond framed by 2 sapphires. It was not wealth on display. It was a quiet symbol of endurance, of second chances. He imagined kneeling, imagined Claire's eyes widening, her planner tucked under her arm even in that moment. He imagined her laughter, her tears. But then the doubt came. Was it too soon? Would proposing now collapse the fragile bridge they had only begun to build? Was he asking her to carry his healing as well as her own? He closed the box and slipped it back into the drawer. For now, love was patience. Commitment was waiting for the right kind of quiet. On Cape Cod, the tide whispered against the shore. Claire walked the beach with her mother's arm looped through hers. They talked of recipes, neighbors, spring blooms. Claire's planner stayed closed that evening. Her heart, however, remained open steady, scarred, but unafraid. Some bridges took years to build. This one was worth every step. Some loves don't arrive with thunder. They arrive like a lighthouse, steady, faithful, and warm. Cape Cod sky blushed with the soft orange of late summer. Waves lapped the shore in gentle rhythm, as if the ocean itself had slowed to listen. Claire Sutton walked barefoot along the sand, her mother resting in a chair nearby, wrapped in a shawl, though her cheeks carried the glow of health again. Graham Whitaker walked beside Claire, the box in his pocket heavier than stone, though it was small enough to vanish in his hand. Tonight was not about spectacle. It was about truth. He stopped near a weathered dock, the wood creaking with memory of storms survived. Claire turned, puzzled by his pause. Then he opened the box. Inside lay a ring, not new, not extravagant. It was his grandmother's band, restored and softened into a style that spoke of endurance more than display. A modest diamond, framed by engravings of waves and light. I had it reset, he said quietly. Not to make it richer, but to make it honest. To honor what we've built. Claire's breath caught. The planner she carried slipped from her hand into the sand. She pressed her fingers to her lips, eyes wet with a joy she had never dared imagine. Yes, she whispered, then steadier. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, where it glowed in the fading sun like a lantern. Weeks later, Whitaker Renewable announced the engagement not with fanfare, but with clarity. HR and the board confirmed all protocols. Claire remained independent in her role, her reporting line clear, her professional standing intact. Transparency was the foundation. Trust was no longer private, it was institutional. Their wedding came in late autumn, beneath maple leaves turning crimson. A small chapel in New England, family and close colleagues gathered. Claire's mother walked slowly but proudly down the aisle. Her strength returned. Graham's vows were simple. I promise not to test you. I promise to trust you. Claire's reply was equally steady. I promise to keep building, with honesty, with courage, with us. The reception was modest, tables set with pumpkin centerpieces, candles flickering against the chill. Laughter mingled with the sound of fiddle and guitar. No headlines, no spectacle, just warmth. By year's end, the Harbor Light Fund launched, dedicated to heart research and patient support. It bore no names, but those who knew understood. Claire's mother cut the ribbon at the small ceremony, her hand firm as she smiled into the autumn wind. Inside the company, culture shifted for good. The trust code became standard. Employees spoke more openly, boundaries respected, concerns addressed without fear. What had begun as Claire's quiet discipline was now the rhythm of the whole. Graham led differently, no longer with suspicion, but with space. He asked, listened, stepped back. Some days it was harder than others, but every morning, when he saw the ring on Claire's finger beside her planner on the counter, he remembered love was not control. Love was trust. Claire thrived in her role, her systems shaping not just compliance, but confidence. She carried her planner still, filled with notes and checklists. Yet tucked in the back pocket was a folded photo, the Cape Cod shoreline at dusk, where Graham had asked not with thunder, but with light. Their story was not about perfection. It was about scars turned to strength, mistakes turned to lessons, suspicion turned to faith. One evening, as winter neared, they returned to the same dock. Waves touched the sand with cold hands, the lighthouse in the distance sweeping its beams slow and sure. They walked together, hand in hand, neither rushing nor hesitating. The harbor light shone, steady against the dark, and they kept walking, learning the art they both needed most, staying. In the end, Graham and Claire's journey teaches us something deeper than a love story. It reminds us that trust is not built in a single grand gesture, it is earned, patiently, through small and steady choices. Many of us know the sting of betrayal, the weight of doubt, the temptation to control what feels fragile. Yet this story shows that healing comes not from constant testing, but from allowing another person the space to prove who they truly are. Claire's quiet integrity returning gifts, logging every decision, choosing courage when fear pressed hardest shows that strength is not loud, it is steady. And Graham's transformation reveals that even the most guarded heart can learn to lead not through suspicion, but through trust. In our own lives, whether in family, friendship, or community, the lesson remains: integrity creates safety, and trust gives love room to grow. We cannot erase scars, but we can live with them, and sometimes even turn them into bridges. So, when life offers the choice between fear and trust, let us remember this true security is not in control, but in faith in ourselves, and in the people who have earned their place beside us. Thank you, dear friends, for spending your time with this story. If Graham and Claire's journey touched your heart, we invite you to keep this circle of stories alive. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so together we can continue exploring tales of love, trust, and second chances. Your support means the world to us.